Hey everyone, and welcome again to our Salesforce.org Architect Academy on Trailhead Live. Today I'm joined by Gokul Seshadri, our Senior Principal Customer Success Architect at Salesforce.org and also a Marketing Cloud advisor as well. And Tiago Ruivo, who's another Senior Principal Customer Success Architect at Salesforce.org. And I'm Tom Letty, I'm one of the directors of our advisory services team. And we're going to talk about connecting multiple Salesforce orgs to a single Marketing Cloud instance. And if you saw a couple months ago, we did a Trailhead Live session on connecting the right order of connecting Salesforce and Marketing Cloud. This is kind of the follow-up to that, where it's okay, now you know what order to stand them up in. What do you actually do if you have more than one Salesforce org? So you can use the chat window below to ask any questions during the broadcast. And also, if you look in the related links, we've got a trail mix that has supporting white paper, some blog posts we've written, and then a few other trails and help articles that'll be useful for you. So before we get started, we've always got our forward-looking statement. Make sure that you're not making any purchases based on anything we talk about here, but rather what's actually available today. And just a really quick background about Architect Academy. Our goal is to increase the knowledge of our customers, actually our customers and our partners, by increasing the number of architects and expanding knowledge of people who serve nonprofits, higher ed, and K-12. We do this by mostly virtual events now, but hopefully we'll be able to do some more in-person events soon. And we've also got a bunch of content that's available in the Power of Us Hub. There's the Architect Academy Roundtables group that you should join if you're not already a member, and our blog series and white paper series. And again, thank you to everybody for joining. And glad that this is a topic you're interested in. I hope you enjoy the broadcast. All right, so we're going to compare some of the patterns. We'll give a quick description of them, and then talk about the benefits and the limitations, and then we'll get into a little bit of whiteboarding and kind of go through each one in a little bit more detail. And with that, we hand it off to Gokul and Tiago to kind of talk about some of the different patterns for, if you do have multiple Marketing Cloud or multiple Salesforce orgs and you want to connect them to Marketing Cloud.
Sure thing. And this is just a summary table. We'll get into all of these in a little bit more detail further on. We just wanted to from the beginning, put it over here. We analyzed 4 patterns, and they have a lot of similarities, and they are mostly consistent, but we wanted to look at different ways that people can connect Marketing Cloud and Salesforce, pretty much based on how to integrate if they use the existing connector or they don't, and some considerations around things like subscriber keys and overall system architecture, right? Before we get into that too, something that we want to highlight is there's not necessarily a recommended way that works for everyone in a very architect fashion. The answer is always going to be, it depends on your system, it depends on you, right? How complex is your system architecture? What is the source of your contacts? How decoupled do you want those two systems to be, right? And if you actually have the right people in your organization that are able to maintain the systems that are part of this and the integrations that are part of this, right? Any comments there, Gokul? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Tom and Tiago, for having me here. That's very true. All of these involve different considerations. That's exactly what we are going to get into as we delve deep into each of these patterns. But there are only a few options that we could play around with in terms of components and in terms of features. So here we have presented all the possible combinations that you could try. It all results in different levels of effort, different levels of complexity, and what you get out of all this. So let's go into each of these into more detail. Both myself and Tiago will be alternating between each other. So over to you, Tiago, just to go a little bit deeper into the multi-org connector.
Sure. So for the multi-org connector, the idea here is to use whatever is built by default for Salesforce for this kind of use case, right? And so Marketing Cloud provides out-of-the-box package that allows you to connect to multiple orgs. And how the multi-org connector works is that you are able to sync different orgs to different business units within Marketing Cloud, and contacts and leads are able to sync between them. You're able to restrict visibility to those business users, to different users within Marketing Cloud, being able to segment, different orgs and who works with different orgs on different business units on the Marketing Cloud side. There's also a lot of the features that we already have with the regular single org Marketing Cloud connector are available, as far as, kickstarting journeys and syncing data and all kinds of features around, making sure our contacts are there and that you can send reports and you can send emails or any other kind of communication based on reports and campaigns and things like that. So all of that is there from the beginning. So it's much easier to set up, much easier to have those data and process integrations. And overall, you have a lower cost of ownership and maintenance because it's a single tool within Marketing Cloud, right? The limitations is that you do require business units to be there. You are required to have an enterprise edition of Marketing Cloud. And if you already have the single org Marketing Cloud connector, there is some work required to upgrade, in particular associated with rebuilding some of the sharing, because as opposed to the single org connector, we are connecting directly to child business units rather than the parent enterprise business unit.
Right. And then, Gokul, if you want to talk about an enterprise org, and in a minute after we get through these, we'll take a look at the actual architecture diagrams too, and see what these look like and what you'd actually have to build out. So,
yeah, sure. The second option, which is an enterprise org, actually involves introducing what I would call a technical Salesforce org or a CRM system, just to manage all the different constituent IDs that are coming from various Salesforce orgs, streamline that into one single technical org, and then have that org pass through the customer IDs to the Marketing Cloud. This way, there is some sanity in terms of duplicates and other things. There is some consistency. But this does involve, we are introducing a brand new CRM system into the picture, which does not behave like a typical CRM, but which behaves more like a technical pass-through Salesforce org. It does streamline the connectivity. It's pretty straightforward. But in terms of limitations, the main thing we lose here is the ability for the Marketing Cloud to connect back to Salesforce, to propagate back to Salesforce anything that it may want to inform. For example, Journey Builder in Marketing Cloud has got a lot of features through which we could actually communicate back to Salesforce or update a record, create a record, and things like that. Here, that becomes sort of irrelevant because you have introduced an enterprise org right in the middle of the actual Salesforce org and Marketing Cloud. So some of those features will be missing, but it does streamline duplicates. It does ensure that the connectivity behaves as expected. We don't use the individual connector features of the actual business Salesforce orgs. Instead, we just use the enterprise org and then connect it to Marketing Cloud. There is a cost associated in terms of storage and other things, but and there is some work involved in integration strategy. Diego, you want to quickly cover the custom integration?
Sure. So, I mean, the idea here is actually don't use the Marketing Cloud connector at all, right? And so you would have to build all the integrations you want to do between the CRM and between Marketing Cloud. That comes with advantages around flexibility, right? You decide what you integrate. You decide how you want the data model to be in both places. You decide what comes back and forth between them. But obviously, it comes with limitations around I mean, the other, I guess, benefit to highlight is that because you're not using the connector, you can integrate much easier external sources in contacts that necessarily live in Salesforce, right? And that you don't even want them to live in Salesforce for a specific reason. There's a caveat here, which is obviously effort. So you need to build all those things that already come built with the connector. And in particular, that means obviously a lot of the data integrations that those can even be somewhat easy to build, but also there's a lot of business in process integrations that are come out of the box of the connector that allow to streamline that marketing process around things like journey entry points and all the journey, communication back to the CRM that Gokul was talking about, or even being able to send emails from reports or campaigns and things like that. And you would have to be able to build that in a middleware tool if you want to. The other big thing about the custom integration is that if you are consolidating a bunch of different sources for contacts or leads, you're going to need to manage the uniqueness of those sources, and you're going to need to manage how do you assign ultimately subscriber keys and unique identifiers to those different sources of contacts. And so we usually see not just an ETL tool in place, but some kind of master data management tool, either full on or something a little bit more light, to manage consolidating those sources of contacts together. Gokul, do you want to talk a little bit about just using multiple marketing cloud instances?
Yeah. Even though we have called it like a fourth option, it's not really an option or any fine tuning. This is almost like you just want to go stick to the basics. You don't want any of these complications. Your appetite for risk is very low, and you want a very streamlined infrastructure, and you're ready to spend for it. So what do? If you have two Salesforce Orgs, you just create two Salesforce marketing accounts. You end up purchasing two accounts, and they just don't get into this so-called adventure or misadventure, right? Of connecting and things like that, and massaging, manipulating, nothing of that sort. We just have completely independent connectivity, so which is totally out of the box. Of course, there is a flip side. If you have the same subscriber in two Salesforce Orgs, then your marketing cloud journeys are also going to be managed very independently. But it does avoid a lot of technical issues, all these key management issues and things like that, pretty clean. But it doesn't, especially if you have like a couple of orgs, this becomes more and more expensive, more and more maintenance. So a lot of considerations to be taken here, and you really want to evaluate. This would reasonably suit well if two of your Salesforce orgs are talking to two completely different set of constituents. Then probably this will be a lot easier. But you have the same subscriber in both orgs, you really need to think through this option.
Awesome. All right, let's why don't we take a quick look at what some of the patterns will look like for these architectures. And I actually drew some of these out ahead of time because I didn't want people to have to sit there and watch us fumbling around with lucid chart. But to get started, we'll go through each one kind of the way that in the order that we presented them earlier. So if we start with the multi-org connector, this one's actually fairly straightforward. And one thing I think we didn't talk about in the last slide was how this works with business units, right? So you do have to enable business units. Like you said, you need Marketing Cloud Enterprise. And the way that this works, and Gokul or Tiago, correct me if I'm wrong, is you actually have what you have is a parent business unit that contains all of your subscribers. And then all of these other various business units are connected to it that have kind of the different data extensions and journeys and everything that will determine who gets which communications. Is that about right?
Yes. So the idea is that, you set up the business units in Marketing Cloud in the same you would set it up normally for if you have that feature enabled, where you always want to have a certain level of hierarchy between them, and you want to use that feature where you can roll up things to a parent business unit from child business units. But when connecting to an org using the multi-org connector, you end up connecting to one or more business units, right? So there is a one-to-many relationship between Salesforce orgs and Marketing Cloud business units when connecting using the multi-org connector.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, and actually we can see that kind of down here where this one, let's say this is your whatever recruiting and admissions. Has its own Salesforce org. Maybe you've got something for an individual, your business college. And then down here, you've got advancement. And then maybe advanced, you've got a business unit specifically for, alumni relations and another one for, something
high
that's
donors,
high donors or purchasing football tickets, whatever you're doing for fundraising things. So, so like you said, you can kind of split that one. And the other thing that I noticed here is that in theory, you could have some contacts that maybe the source is not Salesforce. So we've got these sources over here, but they're still going through one of the Salesforce orgs. And, however you're connecting it, this could be an ETL tool or you calling an API or whatever. But the idea is that.
Or just a data import.
Yeah, or data. Yeah, exactly. But you wouldn't really be doing this. You would actually want it to go through whichever the appropriate Salesforce org is first, right?
Yes, and I mean a big part of it is how the multi-org connector is set up to use the Salesforce ID of the record combined with the org ID as the subscriber key, right? And so, like the single org connector, the multi-org connector relies on the Salesforce ID as the subscriber key. So if you just bypass the Salesforce altogether, you're introducing a mixed, subscriber key, and that's not conducive to best practice in the long run.
Right. It's actually a good point. So I've got my contact ID, and each, every contact in this org is going to have these contact IDs, and then over here, you've got your subscriber key.
Mm-hmm.
And then within Marketing Cloud, there's a specific table called the all subscribers table, but these actually sync up. So whatever your contact ID is and whichever org you're in, then becomes your subscriber key over here. And
actually, the contact ID becomes contact key in Marketing Cloud, and then eventually it propagates to subscriber key. So you may want to draw two boxes there. Yeah, and then eventually contact key to subscriber key. There is something like that. And the funny thing here is, even though you have connected these different business units to different orgs, for a given account, Marketing Cloud eventually maintains only one all subscriber table at the very top. Yep. So there is at least one place wherein all these different Salesforce IDs jumble up together and kind of flatten up, and then they become the entries. And it's quite possible that the same fellow who exists in two orgs might have two footprints with the two contact keys and two subscriber keys.
Yeah, that's true. So if you do happen to have a contact that's in more than one of these orgs, there's still, and you can run queries within Marketing Cloud to find duplicates based on whatever values you want to look for, if they have a matching email address or their name matches. But you would still have to do some extra work on the Marketing Cloud side to filter those out before you did a send, right?
Absolutely.
But of course, because we're all living within Marketing Cloud Enterprise, it becomes a little easier to manage, right? Rather than having to sync between systems there. And there's where things like, having a custom subscription center and things like that can help you then manage multiple subscribers across different business units. Yeah. As well as that parent business unit that allows you to then roll everything up and report consistently across the entire set of subscribers.
That's actually really, it's useful too when you think about things like GDPR. You know, like you said, if you create a custom subscription center, or, you know, there's a variety of different, you know, acronyms for all the like privacy laws throughout the world. I know there's a specific one for California, and but you know, you can really give somebody an easy way to say, I don't want any emails from your organization at all, right? As opposed to some of the other approaches we'll look at later, where it's kind of like, well, you could either do a lot of extra work to build a custom subscription center outside of Marketing Cloud, or you can, you know, people can unsubscribe maybe from one business unit, but they might have to unsubscribe multiple times if they really want to get off of your all of your mailing lists. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Tom. In this option, that is one big consideration, because how do you actually propagate? What options are you going to give to the consumer? These multiple Salesforce org and the multiple business unit is our own world, our own technical solutioning. But to a consumer, they might still look at a single nonprofit organization or a single university. So if somebody unsubscribes, how do you make sure, where do you actually store it, right? Becomes a big question.
Yeah.
Where do you store your subscriber preferences? If you're storing at the business unit level, in this option, you would most likely do that. Then the question is, for those who opted out at the top level, you need to make sure you propagate that back to all other business units. So there is a lot of data synchronization work that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another important consideration is, once you turn on the multi-org connector in the Marketing Cloud, you can't turn it off. What does that mean? That means by default, right, it's not turned on, okay? And what Marketing Cloud does is, when you have this parent and child business units, without a Marketing Cloud setup, multi-org setup, the children inherit the connectivity from the parent business unit. But when you turn on the multi-org, that connectivity is totally lost. So each independent business unit, it's up to them to establish a connectivity if and when they want with any Salesforce org. So there are a lot of things to consider.
Yeah, that's a good point. And
I think that's a great point to call out. It's just like, because most people, I think the two things you mentioned, in particular, the fact that once you turn it on, you cannot turn it off. And there are some very specific things that you can do in the single org connector that you cannot do on the multi-org connector. So you really want to make sure to look at that further prior to turning it on. But also, you know, if you already have the single org connector and you want to turn on multi-org connector, there is rework associated. Like Gokul said, kind of there's an inversion of or there's a change of where to connect to, from the enterprise business unit all the way to the individual child business units. And so there is rework around remapping data extensions. There's rework around, maybe changing some of the journeys and some of the templates. And so you need to be mindful that it is not something that is just a turn of the key situation.
Yeah, and you actually even have to contact sales support to turn it on in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're absolutely right. That's why we don't recommend this option straight away to people, who want to connect one Marketing Cloud to multiple Salesforce orgs. There are so many considerations. There is one more thing along the line of what I mentioned earlier. If you go with the default Marketing Cloud and the business unit connectivity, there is an option for you to receive the Salesforce data at the very top, and then distribute only the data necessary to individual business units. In your case, in your example, Tom, this would be, say, recruitment and admissions and maybe like alumni and things like that, advancement.
Mm-hmm.
You can subdivide the data that is coming from Salesforce parent, and then you just deliver the data that's necessary for business unit 1. The parent has some control over what business unit 1 is seeing, what business unit 2 is seeing, and so on, right? Once you turn on the multi-org, then what does that mean? Every org is connecting to independent orgs, establishing its own independent connection. So there is no centralized control at the Marketing Cloud level. So each business unit end up seeing everything that is in that connected org.
Yeah, that's actually a good call out too. Yeah, that's something I think I didn't even consider. So I'm sure a lot of other people haven't either. So yeah, it's definitely a good mention. All right, should we move on to enterprise org?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Now, I have to say, I'm not a fan of this approach. It's an option, and we should talk about it because it is a valid option. But you've kind of got this org sitting in the middle here that's not really doing anything except for funneling data and
relaying data.
Yeah, relaying data, and you can use it to eliminate duplicate records before they get to Marketing Cloud. I mean, there are some benefits to it, but if out of the 4 patterns we're looking at, if I had to pick a least favorite one, it would be this.
I think there's caveats to that, right? So I think that I think that there is a caveat where some org strategies so some of the usages for this are not necessarily an org that has nothing, right? And that has no business functions in it. So we see some customers that have a hub and spoke org strategy where things are already rolling down from individual orgs, business unit orgs to the top. And so in those use cases, for example, it may make sense if they have a org at the top that already exists that they use for reporting or they use for some of the executive functions. And so in that case, it may make sense. I think that this can be a good way to Gokul's point before, implementing the multi-org is a process and it comes with a lot of considerations, right? And so this can be a good place for people to start, where if you already have an org that has more functionality, that is already connected to Marketing Cloud, and maybe you're thinking about you just have a very specific use case where you need data from another place, this enterprise org can, more than an enterprise org, just be a pass-through org for some of that data. I mean, I do want to highlight, you need to be very careful with scalability, right? Because if you keep doing that, that just falls on its foot. But like, it is something that if there's just a very specific use case and you don't want to go through the issue of, spinning up an entire new project to upgrade the connector, maybe something that may make sense. That being said, I mean, I'll defer to you on that, Gokul, too.
Yeah, sure.
Timmy, by the way.
Yeah, at least at least there is one situation where I have seen that this architecture somewhat makes sense. I have seen organizations which, for various historical reasons, this goes back to like maybe orgs, organizations which adopted Salesforce like last 5 years, 10 years, whatever, right? They might have a bunch of Salesforce orgs at the individual department level, for example, in a university, or it could be various chapters in a country or some, in case of NGO. And they are already looking at an opportunity to consolidate. Maybe they think because over the years, Salesforce has added a lot of muscle. And now Marketing Cloud, now they are getting into Marketing Cloud. This becomes an opportunity to consolidate the orgs. So maybe these older orgs on the left-hand side are not Lightning ready yet, or they are in Classic. And maybe the new org is Lightning, and the whole chain is in a process of migration. In that situation, when you are introducing Marketing Cloud in the mix, oh no, how do I make the best use of it? Then this architecture makes sense. What you do is you put your eventual enterprise org right in the middle, and then you start off with this pass-through. You just let all the contacts pass through the middle org and then do your Marketing Cloud business. But your eventual aim is to move the business processes from the department 1 and department 2, make them Lightning ready, do all the optimizations, because you think that you are not making use of a lot of out-of-the-box features, which you are not ready, which are not available long time back. But right now these are ready. So you are not just migrating, you are revamping, you are rethinking your business process around this customer 360. So there is a lot of consolidation happening. So you can almost call this like an intermediate state And eventually, your eventual aim is to kind of completely retire department 1 and 2 orgs and then just live with one central IT. In that case, by adopting this architecture, you're saving yourself a lot of effort over time.
So using
That
this
is
as
one.
this pattern is more of a transition architecture rather than a final architecture.
You are absolutely. That is at least one situation where I think this makes more sense. But in other cases, like Tom said, this may be the least option to consider, but really depends on where the customer is in their marketing and customer 360 journey.
I have another question for you, Gokul. I mean, I think that sometimes we see organizations that, and it's very common in universities, but it can be happening in other use cases where the marketing team is very centralized and they are very concerned about messaging. And so although there may be other CRMs over there in the departments, we want to make sure that everything kind of goes through, like, let's call it, not we have it there tagged as central IT, but it'll be more of like a marketing CRM prior to going to Marketing Cloud. Is that something you've seen, and would that something that would make sense to use this scenario for?
Absolutely. I have seen both cases. In many cases, the central marketing team doesn't want to own the central marketing cloud because it's so somewhat technical in nature. So they just, I have seen that use case, but I've also seen places wherein some organization wants to completely unify their marketing efforts. They don't want this siloed approach. In which case, it makes sense to have this pass-through org and just manage. Again, the big consideration there is you are losing out on some features which are so significant, like propagating your marketing events back to Salesforce, right? This is not your real Salesforce. This is like a pseudo org. So you really cannot propagate back. So do you really don't want any of those data going back from Marketing Cloud to Salesforce? If you're okay with that, then probably it makes sense.
And in particular, the business process, right? So based on this, create a case or create a record in Salesforce using journeys, or being able to set back some of your data in Salesforce and use that, right? So all of those features would be lost because there's this layer in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things you also lose is, if I create a report in one of these Salesforce orgs and I want to do a send to that report, I can't, right? Because it's not in the org that's connected to Marketing Cloud. It's in this kind of back-end org that,
exactly.
If I create, now I can replicate the data here and create a report here and send it to Marketing Cloud and, do a send based on that. But like you said, there's some of the information that typically comes back from Marketing Cloud with send data. And then there's also, information, or if I want to, same thing with campaigns. If I want to send to a campaign, it has to be in this org for me to be able to actually use the standard Marketing Cloud, send a campaign functionality.
Yeah, absolutely. In the white paper, we also talk about restricting access to this Salesforce org because it's a technical org, right? And that again becomes an issue. If somebody wants to log in and take a look at, how their customer from department 2 is mapped here, what happened and all those things, then we end up giving more Salesforce licenses and so on. So over time, the cost of maintaining this tech org could be significant.
Now, I do think you convinced me, though, for a transition architecture, this does make sense. So if the idea is that you're slowly going to be retiring some of these other legacy orgs and, kind of taking them out of the picture, and then, eventually you end up with this being your central org, or I think to Tiago's point, like you've already got this set up anyway, and now you're just implementing Marketing Cloud because you already have this like hub and spoke architecture. It makes sense. And, the one other thing is, I think long-term, if you're thinking about, okay, what's my landscape going to look like in a couple of years? Okay, all these other Salesforce orgs are gone. You can still have these other non-CRM databases that are sending contact information or whatever into this central org and then connecting to Marketing Cloud. And then once you get the other Salesforce orgs out of your landscape, now you've got your one Salesforce org, you've got your single org connector, and you don't have to worry about any of the multi-org, the drawbacks from the multi-org. So it could.
And you see a lot of that with our customers, right? Where a lot of our customers are distributed in nature and have a lot of orgs that don't necessarily need to exist as separate entities, right?
Right.
And I should also mention here that this move from individual orgs to this centralized org, it involves a lot of commitment, okay? And it involves roadmap, it involves effort. So sometimes we begin with this nice vision, right, of enterprise org, but it never happens. Nobody is able to find time, and we keep adding more features to the orgs on the left-hand side, and it becomes impossible to move. So that should be this whole vision is transitional as long as there is a lot of commitment from whosoever is involved. It's not easy.
Yeah, I can actually relate to that. I have a past employer that I'm not going to mention, but we actually started out doing a digital transformation where we had some 700 and some different systems, not just Salesforce Orgs, but that was a part of it. And at the end of the transformation, the idea is to reduce things and simplify your landscape, but we ended up with 900 because we would always get to a point where we were able to migrate like maybe 80% of the functionality from here to here. And then you get to that last 20% that, like you said, it's a heavy lift, and nobody could get a good ROI calculation from it that says this is really worth the amount of effort you're going to put into it. And then every time someone had to think about what the level, the amount of work that they had to do to move everything over, it would be like, can this just wait until next fiscal year or whatever? And then, like you said, that just keeps getting pushed out, and it never actually, realistically never happens. So that's something to keep in mind too, for sure.
Yeah. I think it's a good transition to actually the next. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Go.
What I was going to say was, you never get everything that you had in department one org, right? You should be convinced. You should be happy with like 80% functionality, and then that becomes successful. If you need all the features, because this org has got a different evolution, it may not be able to satisfy all the needs in a way that your older org offered. So there are a lot of give and takes that happen. Sorry, Tiago, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that this is actually a good transition, because oftentimes what ends up happening is that the one that falls is that central marketing org, and you end up actually evolving into a completely custom solution sometimes, right?
Yeah, actually, that is a good transition to our next one, which is an ETL tool or custom integration, however we want to.
Yeah.
And this one is basically, you don't use Marketing Cloud Connect at all. Kind of like you said earlier, it's just you have an ETL tool, which it could be MuleSoft, Jitterbit, any pick your tool. There's a bunch of them out there, but you kind of use that, and then a master data management system, which is where you keep all of your subscriber keys, and then you have this one single connection to Marketing Cloud, and then whatever Salesforce or non-Salesforce or whatever, they're sending their data to this tool, and then you're harmonizing it here, right?
Yeah. This architecture made sense sometime back when these two clouds were pretty independent, and the connectivity was just the connector, and there were not a lot of features. But over these years, what we are seeing is a lot of convergence between these clouds, a lot of features being introduced, a lot of options. So this is becoming somewhat less attractive, I would say. What do you think, Tiago?
I think that's right. I think that there's some institutions that culturally really want to decouple systems. And there is definitely, if you don't use a lot of those features that exist that integrate the two clouds, and you just want to use mainly a data integration perspective, that would make sense. I think that is important to call out this option and just say that both Marketing Cloud as well as Salesforce make pretty much everything available through open APIs, right? And so I think the idea here is that there's always the option of just throwing everything out, and you can build your own API connection between them, right?
Yeah.
And so if you require that flexibility, you can do it. You can also, and I think just to call out, be a yes and, right? So, I mean, I think that I would recommend against it, but you may be able to use an ETL thing for a very, very specific thing, and then use the connector for most of the integration. You do need to account that, you know, there's be some race conditions, there may be some subscriber key management and things like that you need to worry about. But if you have a very, 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 very specific use case you need to address too, that is not addressed in any way through the connector, maybe that's a possibility. I think that it is something that we see in bigger customers, right? That have a very, like, it requires a lot of maintenance from the ETL side, from the integration side, right? And so you really need to have a good integration team in place with a lot of resources that can not just build it, but also maintain it and upgrade it as things move, right? And I think that it makes more sense, and I don't know why anyone would do that, but it makes more sense when, like, Salesforce is a small footprint within your overall system architecture, right? So if you don't have a lot of adoption on the Salesforce CRM side, and you're going to use Marketing Cloud with other things, you know, not just from a CRM perspective, but also just other systems, like, you may want to explore this as your option, right? Because there's a limit on how much you can, like, pass through things through a Salesforce org and still be storage efficient.
Exactly. I'm almost thinking this option would make sense if the organization is already thinking of a long-term MDM strategy way beyond Salesforce and Marketing Cloud. Like what Tom is illustrating here, you've got a number of bespoke data sources, system of records, which is hurting your operations. So you want to consolidate. So consolidation on MDM is a part of your bigger strategy. And then you want to piggyback on that exercise while you connect Salesforce and Marketing Cloud. So it's almost like you're not doing this just for the sake of connecting Salesforce and Marketing Cloud. Rather, you're piggybacking on another exercise, MDM exercise, that you're doing it for other business reasons. And then you're tagging that along with this connectivity option.
Yes, I think that, so what you're saying is pretty much, if you have a very, very distributed system architecture that is very specific to a lot of departments, after a while, you need that MDM strategy in place to have a central view of people. And regardless of that work, you piggyback on that, and you have that central contact repository that then you can sync with Marketing Cloud, right? Which I think it's something that I think we really should call out here, is that the more sources you have and independent sources you have feeding directly into Marketing Cloud, the more you need to worry about having the right processes in place to clean up and deduplicate and consolidate them so that the data in Marketing Cloud becomes manageable, right? There is, you can correct me here, Gokul, but like there is not a super efficient way of doing data cleanup directly in Marketing Clouds once something has been inserted and is a subscriber and has had some communication sent to them. And so it is important, as if you use this tool, to have something prior to loading on Marketing Cloud that does a little bit of that MDM work.
Absolutely. You're spot on, Diego. That's absolutely right. Marketing Cloud is not meant for that purpose, so it expects you to do all the cleanup. Another thing to bear in mind is this arrow that goes from ETL to Marketing Cloud. It's not really a real-time sync and things like that. Marketing Cloud does offer FTP options. You could use APIs, but then you're introducing another middleware. So if you just have a naked ETL tool, you're simply depending on FTP, right? Which is not as sophisticated as the options offered by connector. So you really cannot see all the tables. So you need to import, you need to load them into source data extensions, and then you you do your custom data extensions to actually do the send journeys and all those things. Overall, very significant overhead. So it's certainly something to watch for if in case you're considering this as a serious option.
I think that, I mean, something to call out though, I think that, so MuleSoft has a marketing cloud connector that exists. That is not necessarily thought to connect Salesforce Orgs to Marketing Cloud, but can be used to connect some of those external sources. And the same thing applies to some of the some other ETL tools. And there is definitely some work being done, I think, on the Salesforce side as far as part of the Customer 360 work to revamp some of those contact consolidation and contact cleanup and marketing CRM activities that will change a little bit how Marketing Cloud is integrated with Salesforce. I don't know if you agree. All of those are where we really, really, really go back to that Save Harvard slide and say, I think most of the conversation that we're having today, it's based on what exists today. But we know that there has been, that people are working on some other things, right?
Yes. And another thing to consider before we move out of this option is you lose the connectivity to Salesforce from Marketing Cloud. You cannot propagate data directly because you're no longer using the Marketing Cloud connector. So you cannot, as a part of your journey, you cannot update a contact or create a campaign member or whatever, right? So all of those features are lost. So it's like almost unidirectional. That's another feature loss, which is expensive in many cases. So something to consider.
That's a good point. Some of those same limitations that we talked about with an enterprise org, where I can't just send to a report from one of these source Salesforce orgs, or I can't get send data. Well, I guess you could create a bi-directional thing with the middleware to get sent.
Everything becomes an API call, right? So even from the journey, everything kind of just becomes an API call outwards, which comes with consideration, and it comes with a lot of error handling and retries and all those kinds of complexity that ultimately are part of an ETL or a DSB tool, right? I think that is not just pointing integration back and forth. There's a lot of extra work as part of maintaining and having integrations between systems, right?
Exactly. All right. And then with our last few minutes, let's go to this last one, which is just everybody gets their own Marketing Cloud, and and you don't have to worry about multi-org connector. You don't have to worry about middleware. You just send data directly. And I guess I put ETL, ESB. This could also be like an SFTP. I mean, there's ways to get data even from not in Salesforce, but
or even like just importing data.
Import. There's a variety of ways, and I guess this is good if you really have if your organization is structured this way, where every department is its own legal entity, so you don't have to worry about someone trying to do a global unsubscribe, and you don't want to worry about any of the drawbacks from any other thing. But it's also expensive. You've got a lot of different. You're going to need someone to maintain all of these, and then it's not easy to. If I have contacts in this org and then I have contacts in one of these orgs that overlap, you're not going to have any way of even knowing that when there's all these different marketing clouds, right?
Yeah. The way I've seen this working is people adopt this for sandbox and testing. They don't want to enable multi-org, and they absolutely need a sandbox kind of testing environment in Marketing Cloud. So what they end up buying is they end up purchasing a limited feature Marketing Cloud edition or whatever bare minimal features they could find, but it's an independent Marketing Cloud. And then they connect to the sandbox of the Salesforce, and then they have a production connect to production. But within production environments, having this multiple Marketing Cloud production instance connecting to multiple Salesforce production instance is not something we have seen a lot, simply because nowadays we are talking about audience 360, customer 360, we are talking about consolidation. So unless there is a valid reason, someone wants to do this, I think this is more applicable as a testing environment and production environment. That's how I see it. What do you think, Diego?
I agree. I agree with you. And we're talking about all these advantages and around having, a single marketing cloud instance, you lose a lot of that. Yes, you gain some of the considerations are very similar to the considerations of having multiple Salesforce orgs and a distributed org strategy, right? It may make sense, but when? I think to add to those are just the compliance considerations that exist around just pure marketing communications, right? Salesforce is a CRM. It starts as a more B2B environment. Marketing Cloud is very much of a B2C system. And so if you start having a distributed footprint, you really need to be careful with things like compliance and management of consent.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. Yeah.
I think to add to, this is not necessarily to this pattern, but I think with all the 4 patterns, something I think to call out before we finish is we see cases where customers mix and match, right? And so I don't know if necessarily a good idea sometimes, but obviously you have these 4 levers you can pull, right? And maybe, for example, you really want to have a different marketing cloud instance for advancement, right? That is usually it's an independent entity, and it's usually has very different types of communications with people. But through the recruiting and student admissions process, you actually have, a multi-org setup or something like that. So obviously this applies to very few people, right? Because there's not that many customers have such gigantic footprints that would, merit that. But I think that ultimately something to have in mind is that you never know what's going to happen in 10 years. So, things can then change, and you need to, and you are able to then mix and match these strategies if you really, really need to. I don't want to open it too much, but I just want to call out that exists.
Yeah. There is none of these options are a straightforward yes or no, a lot of considerations, which we discussed. But if you absolutely need a testing environment for Marketing Cloud, cleanly connected to a sandbox of Salesforce, I think option 4 is probably the cleanest. Doesn't involve anything extra. You don't sacrifice anything, but it does involve purchasing a separate Marketing Cloud just for testing, which is a cost.
And then the other thing is that there's a lot of reconnection activities that need to happen every time you refresh that sandbox that is connected to Marketing Cloud. So there is definitely a DevOps consideration there that you need to worry about.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
It's an excellent point.
You're muted, Tom.
Gotta love live broadcasts. All right. So with that, thank you for this. This has been great. It's been a great broadcast. I know this is something that a lot of people are thinking about. I've actually got a customer that's working through these some of these decisions right now. So I know this is it's really helpful, and it feels like we could even talk about we could even continue to talk about this even more. But I think now we're going to kind of get ready to wrap up and just a few success resources. So, like I mentioned, we have some publications. They're all in the trail mix that are down in the related materials. You can download, there's a white paper to download, and then some blog posts and also some trails. If you are not already part of the Architect Academy Roundtables group in the Power of Us Hub, make sure to join. I'll post this slide deck as well as the recording for this will be available on demand within the next couple of days. And otherwise, thank you to Gokul and Tiago for a great session. Thanks to everybody for joining, and thanks to my cat Timmy for making a surprise guest appearance as well. All right.
Thanks for having us here, Tom. It was wonderful discussing these options. Thank you, Tiago. It was very interesting.
I completely agree. Thank you so much to both. This was a privilege.
Yeah, thanks everyone.